Each year on Nakba Day, a British Palestinian couple I know go to the march to commemorate the mass displacement of more than 700,000 Palestinians during the creation of Israel in 1948. A funny thing happened to them this year on their way to the march. Opposite them in the tube were a couple who were evidently unhappy with their presence. My friend's wife had a bag with Palestinian embroidery and pins which said "Free Palestine," "Stop arming Israel," and "Israel out of Gaza." The couple opposite stared but kept silent. One of them tried to take a picture of the badges, no doubt to report her to the police. 2 stations later they rose to get up, but not before one of them had turned round and said, "You don't belong here, you should go back home." There was much astonishment in the carriage after they left. A debate started, and it soon became clear the carriage was in sympathy with my Palestinian friends. They were doctors in the NHS who had arrived from Jordan nearly 3 decades ago. Both were Palestinian, whose families came from Jaffa and Jenin. A woman to their right said, "I'm Irish. I know what you feel. We had this for 800 years, and we were considered subhuman by the Brits. They still look at us as foreigners." 2 black British men opposite them laughed. One of them said, "They occupied the world for 200 years and we're not leaving. We're here to stay." Once on the street level, my friends found the streets from South Kensington all the way to Waterloo Place packed with pro-Palestine supporters. Never in their time in Britain had they seen numbers like this. The number of pro-Palestinian marchers was far higher than the police admitted. The presence of 2 rival marches on the streets of London on Saturday had been presented to the police and the media as 2 extremes. A slur had been invented that the pro-Palestinian marchers had intended to pass by a synagogue, whereas that had never been their plan or their route. But the numbers told their own story. Tens of thousands were pro-Palestine, while supporters of the far-right agitator Tommy Robinson, whose real name is Stephen Yaxley Lennon, could barely fill Parliament Square. Particularly noticeable on the Nakba Day march this year was the loud and vocal presence of British Jews, both secular and religious. It was far more problematic being a Jew in the hate-filled square of British fascists, for reasons that soon became obvious as soon as anyone opened their mouth. Yaxley Lennon told his followers to go to the gym because a fight was coming to this country. In an interview, he said he would stop Islam and end foreign funding. Presumably by ending foreign funding, he meant he would return the money he himself got from the Philadelphia-based Middle East Forum, or the US billionaire Robert Shillman, or the Australian Liberty Alliance, or the Jewish Defence League. It was time for Muslims to go, Yaxley Lennon continued. "You've got your homes to go to. This is our home. We've got nowhere to go to," he said. Kelly Jane Keane, who styles herself as a women's rights activist, amplified the anti-Islam rant. "It is absolutely vital. If we want to save this country, we have to remove Islam from every single place of authority," she said. Yaxley Lennon and Keane made awkward bedfellows for the pro-Israel figures who had funded this gathering. The tension they created with the Israel lobby was absolutely clear when a former Israeli army spokesman, Jonathan Conricus, was interviewed by Piers Morgan. Conricus, who said he enjoyed being in the Parliament Square, defended Keane for calling for the removal of Islam from all UK officialdom. Conricus attempted to differentiate between Islam, the religion, and Muslims, the people who practice it. This distinction was contradicted by Yaxley Lennon himself, who openly called for Muslims to go home. Morgan rightly asked whether Conricus would say the same thing if the far right turned against Judaism, and Conricus had no answer to that. Strip away the many flags of David at Parliament Square, and this was a white supremacist gathering for Christians only. A banner from the White Vanguard movement said it all too clearly. "End Zionist occupation of Britain. Stop white replacement." The civilization these fascists had come to protect had clearly stopped being Judeo-Christian, whatever that means. As far as I can remember, Christians were the most assiduous persecutors of the Jews. Another banner at the march read, "Fuck Islam, Christ is King," which clearly was a message that the Israeli diaspora minister Amichai Chikli, who had invited Yaxley Lennon to Israel last October, had not paid to be posted. None of the speakers at the Unite the Kingdom march will be arrested or questioned for hate speech. The inequality of the law that currently defines antisemitism and Islamophobic hate speech, and consequently the inequality in the policing of these marches, is all too clear. The legal definition of hate speech clearly does not apply to every British citizen equally. Anyone holding up a placard saying the same thing about Judaism would have been swiftly arrested for antisemitism. But this is not the main danger of allowing such parades of fascism to take place in front of the Houses of Parliament. It is now mainstream to attack all Muslims in Britain, wherever they came from and whenever they came. Michael Gove, the former Tory minister, West Streeting, candidate for the Labour leadership, Yvette Cooper, the former Home Secretary and current Foreign Secretary, Kemi Badenoch, the Tory leader, they've all played on the same Islamophobic trope that Muslim communities are suspect voters, harbourers of extremists, to be treated as breeding grounds for terrorists. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer talked up the cumulative effect of pro-Palestinian marches on antisemitism. Every British leader today talks up the glory days of the 1940s when Britain defeated fascism. All of them airbrush out of history the role Muslims played in fighting for Britain against Germany and Japan. At least 5.5 million fought for the Allies in the Second World War. Nearly 1.5 million Muslims were killed in action. They came mainly from India and Africa and fought in Somalia, Abyssinia and Madagascar. Between 9,000 and 12,000 Palestinians fought for Britain in Egypt and Mesopotamia. But the greatest Muslim contribution was in the British Indian Army fighting the Japanese in the Far East campaign. 1 million Muslims fought in this army. Their descendants are the ones that are now being told by politicians from a wide range of mainstream opinion that they're no longer British enough to stay in this country. The threat of expulsion is real. If Nigel Farage were ever to be installed as Britain's next Prime Minister, every Muslim living here would have something to fear. Unlike the smear that Jeremy Corbyn's leadership of the Labour Party made Britain unsafe for Jews, it really would be true that with Farage in power, Britain would become unsafe for Muslims to live in. Once they start to leave, the Jews would not be far behind, because they would surely be the next target of the white supremacist surge that Farage represents. My Palestinian friends went home fortified by the support their family had been given by white, black, Asian, Jews and Muslims alike. The night before, my friend's wife had phoned up her aunt in Jenin. She had endured a massive Israeli military operation to clear Jenin camp and displace up to 45,000 Palestinians. This time, her aunt was in despair. The white tents of settlers had just appeared on their farmland northwest of Jenin. That could only mean one thing. The tents would soon become an outpost, and very soon their farming land and their only income would disappear altogether. As everyone now knows, the settlers run the West Bank. My wife's friend told me, they tell us to go home. I would like nothing better than to go back to my family's home in Jenin. But we're here in Britain because we've been expelled from that land, and Britain is responsible for what happened in 1948 and what happens every day since then for the past 78 years. Where does Britain want us to live now?